This is a suspenseful science fiction masterpiece with an unpredictable ending, because without seeing the end, you never know what the truth is. It mentions the bold concept of the dream world, which predates Inception by more than a decade. Today we bring you this suspenseful and high-scoring movie, starring Tom Cruise and adapted from Spain. Open your eyes, and with the sound of a call from the camera, the awakened man Nick starts a new day of life, from dressing up to washing up, until he drives his own sports car to the street. At this moment, he discovers something strange: the streets are empty everywhere. But Nick didn't care. He thought the road here was under police control, but until he drove to the bustling city center, it was still empty. I looked at the time for a moment and found that it was already 9:05 in the morning. The whole street should have been bustling, but at this moment, no one appeared. Scared, Nick quickly stopped the car, thinking that something terrible had happened. However, there were no signs of damage to all the buildings and facilities in the entire city. Strangely, it seemed that Nick was the only one left in the vast city, and what was going on? Nick, who was unaware of the truth, was frightened by this scene. He ran desperately to find traces of other people's existence, but to no avail until Nick woke up from bed in shock. Open your eyes. With the familiar sound of the alarm clock, Nick realized that he had just had a terrible nightmare. As a wealthy child, Nick inherited a considerable fortune due to his parents being involved in a car accident. With his handsome appearance and wealth, Nick lived a life of frequently changing girlfriends. But it wasn't until Nick met the woman Julia, who fell in love with Nick at first sight, that he would completely change his fate. With a playboy mentality, Nick quickly abandoned Julia, so much so that he didn't invite Julia to his birthday party. But Julia's uninvited arrival made Nick very unhappy because he didn't like the feeling of being entangled. At Nick's birthday party, his best friend Ajay gave him blessings, and Ajay warmly introduced his new friend Laura to Nick. Seeing the youthful and beautiful Laura, Nick quickly fell into it. However, unlike previous girls, Laura's appearance gave Nick a heart-wrenching feeling. While Ajay was drinking, Nick brought Laura to the room, chatting and laughing happily. Nick, who was witty, humorous, and handsome, also caught Laura's heart. However, Ajay quickly noticed their intimate behavior. He intentionally spilled wine on the ground, and the two also noticed that Ajay was a bit unhappy. Laura had to leave awkwardly and find an excuse to get the wine. Faced with Nick's playboy mentality, Ajay sneered. Ajay said that Laura is his dream girl, but he knows that if Nick wants to pursue Laura, he will definitely not be able to compare to Nick, because as a novelist, Ajay is the one who pays for her creation, which is Nick. Only Nick appreciates his talent, and for love and career, it is obvious that he can only choose to withdraw and make the two of them happy. But their precise actions quickly caught Julia's attention, and Julia cast an extreme gaze, while Nick didn't even care. That night, Nick personally escorted Laura back home and the two of them confided in each other all night. Nick also personally drew a sketch for Laura, and Laura completely forgot about Ajay. Although the two of them didn't make any excessive moves that night, Nick knew very well that he really fell in love with the girl Laura. As Nick left, he didn't expect Julia to secretly track him. Julia remained unwilling and tried to save Nick. Julia deliberately used words to stimulate Nick to get into his car, but Nick looked at Julia's confession coldly and said he had fallen in love with the girl Laura. Julia, who has a romantic mind, is currently experiencing an emotional outburst and completely losing her sanity. She steps on the gas pedal and drives forward regardless of safety. When Nick realized that the situation was not good, it was already too late to stop Julia. The car crashed into the guardrail on the bridge and rushed out directly. As the front of the car hit the ground, there was a serious collision. In the blink of an eye, Nick found himself and Laura had come to the park to make an appointment. He told Laura about the accident between himself and Julia. Nick thought he had just had a terrible nightmare, but he didn't realize that he had a beautiful dream until he woke up. Nick suffered disfigurement due to the car accident, while Julia has already died due to the accident. Despite Nick's considerable wealth, the medical technology at the time was simply unable to restore his former appearance. Doctors had made every effort to restore him to the current level. Obviously, Nick still couldn't accept such an ugly version of himself. Although the doctors sympathize with Nick, they have no other choice. In order to appease Nick, the doctor gave him a mask to disguise himself, but this self-deception was not what Nick wanted. Seeing such an ugly self, Nick had no confidence in facing Laura at this moment. However, Nick, who had been isolated at home for many days, decided to try to accept this kind of himself. He bravely took the first step to find Laura, and when Laura saw Nick's ugly appearance, it was obvious that he had a feeling of rejection in his heart. For Nick's invitation, Laura even brought Ajay as a companion. At this moment, Laura's heart was more sympathy than love. Losing her handsome appearance and her interesting soul seemed to lose value. Even passers-by would cast strange looks and ridicule at Nick when they saw him, which dealt Nick a heavy blow. Nick also saw that Laura was only sympathizing with him, but Nick didn't need such sympathy. He bluntly broke through this awkward situation. Faced with Nick's rumors and gossip, even Ajay couldn't bear such. Nick, wearing a mask, he ran wildly on the street to vent his frustrations, like a walking corpse. That night, he lost his best friend and loved one, and Nick even fantasized about the scene of Laura and Ajay hugging tightly on the other end of the street corner. At this moment, Nick completely collapsed and fainted on the street. However, soon after, the police locked Nick up on charges of murder. As a psychologist, Old Boy wants to know what exactly happened during this period in order to figure out this case. Nick told the doctor all about his previous experiences, but what happened next made Nick start to doubt his life. So much so that Nick now wears a mask, because he doesn't know if there is an ugly face hidden beneath the mask. Nick believes that after listening to what's going on, the doctor will definitely think he's crazy. On the night she woke up on the street, Laura took the initiative to find Nick. After careful consideration last night, Laura generously admitted that Nick had changed his appearance, which he couldn't accept at the moment. However, he still liked Nick in his heart and hoped he could pick himself up, and he would always be by Nick's side. The sudden arrival of happiness left Nick at a loss, and soon after, good news came from the hospital. The attending doctor told Nick that they had developed a new treatment method that could completely restore Nick's appearance. However, Nick did not believe the doctor's words, believing that the doctor was only trying to earn more treatment fees. But Nick, who didn't care about the money, still agreed to the new treatment. Shortly after the surgery, to everyone's surprise, Nick miraculously regained his former appearance. Everything seemed to be in a dream, and Nick and Laura returned to their happy old days. Even Ajay was relieved of all this, and the three of them returned to their previous harmonious relationship. I thought everything would be heading in a good direction, but one late night, Nick was planning to get up and go to the bathroom. In the moment he turned on the lights, Nick discovered his ugly self in the mirror. This scene scared Nick directly, even Laura who saw it was scared. But in the blink of an eye, Nick realized that he had just had a nightmare. He quickly went to the bathroom to look in the mirror, but fortunately his face did not change. But when Nick returned to bed, he discovered an even more eerie scene, where Laura, who was by his side, turned into the dead Julia. Nick almost fainted when he saw the scene, and Laura disappeared without a trace. What's even more outrageous is that Julia claimed to be Laura. Faced with such a terrifying woman as Julia, Nick quickly tied her up, thinking that Julia must have taken Laura away. Nick chose to call the police at the first time, but when he arrived at the station, Nick almost got arrested by the police. Nick's lawyer told him something even more eerie: Julia had already died, and the Julia he caught was Laura. Even the police confirmed this, but fortunately Laura, who was beaten, was not charged. Nick was looking confused at the moment. What was going on? Even Nick's friend Ajay approached him, thinking that he shouldn't have done such a thing to Laura. Nick told Ajay that he was playing Julia, not Laura at all. However, Ajay didn't want to hear Nick's sophistry at all. Why did they all think that the dead Julia was Laura? Is it really something wrong with my own mental state? Nick, who was unaware of the truth, came to the bar to get drunk, but a mysterious man took the initiative to find Nick. He said he could solve Nick's doubts in his heart. Nick, who was upset and depressed, didn't want to pay any attention, but the mysterious man took the initiative to reveal Nick's identity and name, telling him a very absurd thing. That was, everyone in the bar was Nick's subconscious person, and they only served Nick. As long as Nick wanted to do anything, he could control it. At first, Nick didn't believe it until he said to shut everyone up. As soon as this sentence was spoken, everyone instantly stopped talking. At this moment, it was surprisingly quiet, making Nick even feel scared. Nick was frightened, and the mysterious man kept muttering that he had signed a contract with him. Nick, who was unaware of the truth, has no idea what happened. He can no longer distinguish whether he is in the dream world or the real world, or if there is a mental problem with himself. In order to prove that he is not crazy, Nick came to Laura's home to investigate, but he found that all the portraits of Laura had turned into dead Julia, and even the sketches he drew had turned from Laura into Julia. Could it be Laura's own illusion? When Nick tried to accept this, he didn't expect Laura to come back to him. The long-awaited reunion made the two tightly embrace each other, but Nick soon realized that Laura had become Julia again. Nick's chaotic brain completely drove him crazy and collapsed, and he no longer wanted to see Julia's Nick cover the sand sea with a pillow. He hastily chose to escape. However, as he descended the stairs, Nick found himself transformed into an ugly figure again. Quickly, the police arrested Nick and sent him to prison, accusing him of murder. The police didn't believe Nick's words at all, but the doctors here also felt unbelievable. The truth of the whole thing seems to be closely related to that mysterious man, but Nick has no impression of him at all. However, the psychologist asked Nick another question, which was that during his imprisonment, Nick often mentioned the name Ellie in his dreams, but Nick also had no impression of the name Ellie. For these mysteries, psychologists believe that Nick suffered from temporary neurological disorders, which led to his memory confusion and even forgetting some things. This is the most reasonable explanation, but the doctor cannot guarantee that the police will also believe their conclusions. However, when the doctor left, he said he would help Nick appear in court. Just as the doctor was about to leave, Nick found a familiar figure on TV. It was a technology company about life extension, and the name of the company appeared inside, with 2 letters to be erected. At this moment, Nick suddenly realized that the Ellie in his dream painting was not a human name, but the name of the company that continues life, and the mysterious man was from this company. Nick shouted loudly for the doctor to come back, and in order to find out the truth, the psychologist applied for bail for Nick to go out. Accompanied by the guards, they arrived at the technology company, and the supervisor here introduced them to the purpose of the Life Continuation Company, which is to provide services for patients who are currently wealthy and terminally ill. They use freezing technology to extend the lives of patients until human medical technology breaks through barriers and can completely treat frozen patients. Only then will they awaken customers, provided that they must first die legally before entering freezing. Nick also found that it mentioned about the dream world, which is also a project they are researching, which is that humans will experience birth, aging, illness, and death, but the dream world can completely get rid of this problem. Once this project is successful, frozen patients can choose to continue living in the present moment of the dream world, because in the future world, familiar people around the patients have already left. As long as they erase the memory of the patient's death, the patient will not find themselves in a dream world and will continue to accompany their loved ones. However, dream worlds may occasionally turn into nightmares as the patient's subconscious can come out and cause trouble. Upon hearing this explanation, Nick suddenly realized that he had finally come to understand all of this. He was likely already in the future time and space. Nick took off his mask, turned around, and chose to escape. He directly knocked down the guard and ran out. Nick shouted loudly that the technician was about to wake up, and it was all a nightmare. When Nick took the elevator to the lobby, as he expected, the busy people inside the building disappeared without a trace until another elevator slowly opened, and the mysterious man had been waiting for a long time. The mysterious man told Nick that he was from LA Company and they had met 150 years ago. He was the technician who was responsible for receiving Nick back then. He appeared at the bar to warn Nick that there was a problem with Nick's dream. The technician took Nick to the rooftop and asked him to make a decision. Before that, the technician told him the truth about the whole thing. After fainting on the street that night, Laura never went to find him. Nick, who returned home, was gloomy all day and unwilling to go out until he discovered the Life Extension Company. However, it gave Nick, who had no one to love, a glimmer of hope. He gave this hope of restoring his appearance to the future, and that night he chose to take medication to commit suicide. His body was taken by a technician and sent to freezing. When Nick signed the contract, he chose to live in the present dream world, which meant that on the night he woke up from the street, Life Company had successfully developed the dream world. They erased part of Nick's death memory and pieced it together on the day he woke up on the street. Later, his energy only existed in his own dream, but his subconscious came out to disrupt and destroy it. His subconscious thought he had not recovered his appearance, and Julia did not die, still entangled with him. The chaotic dream caused Nick to kill Julia, leading to his own predicament, and the psychologist was just a character that Nick subconsciously came up with to search for the truth. However, what comforts Nick is that after he passed away, his friend Ajay held a memorial service for him. Laura was unable to recover from her sadness for a long time. The technician told Nick that it was time for him to make a decision, and if he still wanted to live in the present moment of the dream world, the technical team would erase Nick's memory again and reload and update it. But he had another option, which was to go outside the dream world, the future time and space. Because current medical technology could completely restore Nick's appearance, the doctor rushed over and advised Nick that this person was very dangerous. They should leave here quickly. Nick, however, subconsciously fantasized about his friend Ajay. The doctor who saw this scene was dumbfounded on the spot, so much so that the doctor couldn't believe it. What's even more terrifying is that the doctor realized that he might also be a character in Nick's subconscious, but he couldn't believe that with these 2 children and a family, he would be virtual. Until the technician asked the doctor to name his child, the doctor's memory was blank. He couldn't even remember the names of his 2 children, and the doctor's worldview collapsed. However, he quickly realized that this was a predetermined fact. Nick also realized that dreams are beautiful and ultimately a dream. He chose the latter and went to the future time and space. Prior to this, Nick subconsciously recognized Laura and restored his appearance. The 2 made their final farewell in the dream world. The technician told Nick that the only way to awaken himself was to face his fear directly. Nick, who had a fear of heights, came to the edge of the tall building. After a last glance of deep affection with Laura, he chose to jump down without hesitation. With a flashback of his memory, Nick, who had fallen from a tall building, woke up to a familiar call. "Relax, David, open your eyes."